Life is a roller coaster. I've had my share of ups and downs. I've had my ass kicked. Just a few examples. I've been shot, I've been stabbed, I've been bitten, not by my dogs, of course. 2 3-year-long illnesses, both times pronounced terminally ill. One was stage 4 lung cancer, and then part and parcel of that, I created so much that came with it. Homelessness, severe drug addiction, horrible depression, isolating myself from everybody I know and love, and going through it all alone, except, of course, for my beloved pit bulls. They've kept me alive. It's been a wild and crazy ride, but honestly, it's been one hell of a blessing. My friends, my dear friends, the WWE superstars, UFC icons and legends, the leaders of the Hells Angels, the Navy SEALs, spiritual leaders, movie producers, musicians, they say I've used up my 9th life, but I know that I have one more left, and it's gonna be the best one yet. Life's simple these days. It's just me and my pups and doing the best I can for myself, for my dogs, of course, and for as many people as I can. Part of that is I love doing my podcasts. I'm told they're equal parts inspiration and entertainment. It makes me feel like I get a chance to give something back. So my greatest hope and my biggest goal are one and the same: to take all these ups and downs and combine these experiences into something that looks like hope, strength, maybe even a little bit of wisdom. It'll all be in my book, Little Big Man, and that drops later this year. Until then, please join me on my YouTube channel at Rick Bassman, and please subscribe or listen on your very favorite podcast platform. 3 new podcasts every week, one each of the Cancer Warriors, the Pitbull Podcast, and Talking Tough. Hey, all, it's Rick Bassman here for a special edition of Talking Tough. It is a chilly yet beautiful Wednesday night in Southern California. I am hopefully at the tail end of facing a very, very major personal challenge. And at the risk of being cryptic, I'm going to leave it there. I'll talk about it probably next week or the week after or never. Suffice to say this, it's one that people might define as big, tough, life challenging, life threatening, but my head's in the right place. That's a good thing because of the show that we have for tonight. I had a phone conversation last week with a old client and old friend who has become, over the years, on and off. We lose contact, we gain contact. I would dare say more and more of a friend, and that's a cool thing. And I've always, from the day I met this guy, I've regarded him as one of the most, and these are words I used to apply to him throughout the years and still would today: cultured, intelligent, articulate, introspective even. We had an hour conversation last week, as I said, first one that in many years that we've had. And I also came away from that conversation thinking, wow, the years have been good to my friend's brain. I mean, this guy is like this newfound maturity and way to look at life. I mean, the same ability to articulate, the same like very definitive intelligence that was always present is there, and maybe even amplified now. But just this maturity and level of happiness was something I was really happy to experience during that call. We finished the call and said, damn, that should have been the podcast, but we weren't ready for it. So that's all right. Now, let me talk about another guy. This goes back to another old client. 1998, I think it was, we were first introduced. This guy at the time, when Japan was on fire, before UFC owned the world of mixed martial arts, Japan was the it destination. This guy was on top at Pride, which was the it company. I wouldn't say arguably, but absolutely regarded as the #1 MMA heavyweight fighter in the world at that time. And not many people will ever be able to claim that distinction. And then went over to Abu Dhabi and just owned the submission division 3 years running. Pretty amazing accomplishment at the time. This guy was absolutely jacked out of his gills. Some would say, and I'll say it affectionately, maybe a little out there at that time. Crazy. All right, I said it. And he'd go variably by the nicknames, the Specimen and they became very famous, maybe not for the right reasons or all the right reasons. And we'll talk about this tonight, the smashing machine. So this is a little weird intro, and I wing it as I always do. This crazy smashing machine, this incredibly cultured, intellectual, and now I think very, very mature person. It's the same guy. You wouldn't think that. How could all that be contained in the same person? Well, I'm glad to say, from my estimation, it is. And I'm glad to reintroduce to myself, and I don't really need to reintroduce to the world, because this guy's very famous. He's a legend, an icon from the sport of mixed martial arts. And as we'll talk a little about today, get about to really make an indelible print in the much bigger world of entertainment in general. My old client, my longtime friend, none other than the specimen, the smashing machine, Mark Kerr.
Hey, Rick, that's wow, that's an incredible introduction, man. I really that's amazing. You know what? Our relationship has grown into more of a friendship, over the years. And I usually define a friendship as when, I could pick the phone up, not having talked to this person in a significant amount of time, and you just seem to pick up where you left off from the last conversation. And that's the beauty of uh connection, having the ability to connect with another human being on a lot of different levels, and that's at one of those where it's easy to pick those up when you have that connection. And so I appreciate the introduction and all the accolades and everything that go
Appreciate you
with it.
saying
So,
that, Mark. Well, in the immortal words of Jim Morrison, what a long, strange trip it's been.
oh man, it has been, and part of it is that I could pick up pen and paper and I couldn't write this story. I couldn't write it because no one would believe it. Like if I said this is a nonfiction story and I wrote it, people go like, yeah, right. It's had some incredibly complex emotional times for me, some incredibly unbelievable highs. It's had a lot of really hard learning lessons. Um, Unavoidably, it's either all those things are going to destroy me or they were going to make me better.
So, were there times in your life where you would categorically say it did the former? It destroyed you, and
Yeah,
you thought it was over?
yeah. I would. Um, when, and this is just really interesting, the timing of this and what we're talking about. I just almost finished a book called Strength to Strength, and it talks about um in life these high achievers, like if you're a Silicon Valley, whiz kid, in your 20s, your brain has it's called fluid intelligence, right? It has the ability to adapt and mold or look at all of this stuff that's been created and condense it and solidify it and make it your own. But as you get older, you have something called crystal intelligence, and your intelligence kind of crystallizes into this different level of intelligence, and those gaps between the two usually set you up for, when you're in fluid intelligence, have this really high achievement. And then as your intelligence goes into a different format of crystal intelligence, so understanding that in my brain now, understanding that back then, my life was so wrapped up into one thing. I had the fluid intelligence to compete in mixed martial arts and wrestling and, all these different formats, to be able to create that kind of life. And I didn't understand, as I was evolving and changing into, my brain was changing into something different. I didn't know how to evolve and change. And so those things at the time felt like they were destroying me. A lot of them self-inflicted. A lot of things that I did looking back on it, you hear the term a lot, like self-medicate, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, oh, well, realistically, I was trying to find, your body is designed to find like homeostasis, right? It's trying to find its balance point. It's trying to find its equilibrium. And it's like, if you're so far off kilter one way or the other, you're going to try whatever you can to feel that sense of normal. So I think a lot of that, relationship wise, career wise, a lot of the things that were going on at the time, man, it felt like it was like 10 deaths when all
Dude,
that stuff would hit you at once.
it was crazy freaking times. Mark, I remember like our origin story, if you will, was in partnership at my pro wrestling school at a gym in Los Angeles called R1, the Raw
Yep.
Center, we called it at the
Yep.
time. One of run by, in my mind, one of the absolute true pioneers and good guys of mixed martial arts, a guy named Rico Chiapparelli, NCAA champion himself, I believe, and hell of an instructor and
Yep.
hell of a business guy. You would never know about how he dressed and presented himself, but that was just Rico. I remember being approached by Rico one day, and he was such, in many ways, kind of like a low key, chill guy. And I was managing Oleg Taktarov at that time. He was my first, name guy that I represented in mixed martial arts. Had a relationship with Rico, and he goes, Rick, I may have something for you. But, and as I remember it, at least, he said, but it might be one of those like, be careful what you wish for situations here. He goes, I am like trying to manage these two guys. They're arguably the top two heavyweights in the world. He goes, I can't handle them, man. He goes, I mean, what was going on there? I mean, what
Oh
would,
man.
like, and other guy, of course, is Mark Coleman.
Yeah. You know what? It was Rico, and I believe his brother's name is Lou.
Yep.
Lou and Rico Chiapparelli.
Yep.
And Rico was a little bit older than me, and he had wrestled at Iowa. What's crazy about it is they were trying to bring something into life that didn't exist. So it
was all before our time back in those days.
Oh my God, man! Nobody understood even they couldn't understand even the basic. Like I've done interviews before where I've said, like, you're explaining this to somebody and they go, hang on a second, you do what? Hang on.
Back then,
yeah, right? like nobody had a real idea. So for somebody to come up with like, hey man, we need to take these guys and present them to X, Y, and Z, or get them this, that. Because at the time also, nobody really knew what their value was. You didn't know.
Wild West, man. Yeah, absolutely.
You didn't know if you're worth $500,000 a fight, $1 million a fight.
Mhm.
You didn't know. You just kind of threw a number out there, and if that's what the promoter felt like, in Japan, you could get some ridiculous money back then.
I remember the deal we did with Pride, which was, I think, the first and we don't need to get into numbers and all that.
Yeah.
Private business, but it was a good contract, and it was a hell of a monthly number, paid monthly, if you remember that. And,
absolutely.
To me, that kind of deal felt pretty good back then, but it was like shooting in the dark, trying to figure out, like when Coleman the next year went over and did that fight with
the fight.
Yeah, we were just making numbers up. It was pretty wild times.
Yeah, Rick, I don't think the general public gets an idea now, because there's enough media information out there now. People can watch your podcast and listen to it, and they can hear the behind the story, right? Like before this existed, this format, people just still didn't get it. I mean, they still didn't get how really, like, you were just making it up event by event by event. And what you're talking about, that monthly, for me, it changed my whole entire life. It changed my whole entire life. It gave me stability that I never had, allowed me to concentrate on one thing, on a day-to-day basis, to just go, what are you doing today? I'm going to the gym. I'm going to the gym again in the afternoon. I'm going to the gym again at night. I'm not trying to work a job in between going to the gym, work a job, come home, go to the gym. It allowed me flexibility and um, allowed me to just pick a spot going, I want to go there. I want to be the number one dude that does this. I want to go there, and
Well, you
allowed me to have the vehicle to do that.
you were. I think also, in all fairness, since we've already been very, very honest about everything, and I think we'll probably even go deeper and darker. I would dare say back at that time, guys that were built like you and I, I mean, obviously we're built very differently personality wise. I think if you had or I had gotten money like you were being paid on a monthly basis, but got it handed
Yeah.
to you 2 or 3 times a year for 1 or 2 or 3 fights, it'd probably been here today, gone tomorrow. Also,
Hmm.
that's just how we lived our lives back then, I think.
Oh God, yeah, man. There was, you were spending it like you stole it.
Hmm. Hmm.
All of it, because it just, a lot of that was, there's a dichotomy there. There's the idea in an athlete's mind that you can compete forever, right? And then there's a scarcity concept of like, hey, I'm gonna live as hard as I can for as long as I can until it's over. You know, um, and I always had this idea that I could control the ending, like a soft landing for my career. Um, and then it just didn't happen.
I wanted
You
to ask
know,
you about that because you came in and you started with. Uh, I remember your fights, your tournament at UFC was eight.
no, I did Federico Lependa's event
Well,
first.
yeah, you fought in Brazil before that, of
Yeah,
course.
yep, 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 yep.
And that you got, and I'm sorry, and I knew that, of course, but I remember the first time I saw you on TV before I knew you, you were in the 4-man
Yeah,
tournament,
yep,
UFC.
yep.
I think you fought. This is when it was still like style versus style, and it was like Hawaiian bone breaking versus. That actually was a style that
No, I don't doubt it.
it was great
They,
stuff. I think your first opponent was like special Army Ranger.
yeah, yeah, oh my God, it was like champion of the bear pit, like 14, 18-time champion of the bear pit. And,
So when you're standing across the octagon from that guy, are you like worried about these techniques that he might have that he might kill you with? Or are you like, this is ridiculous. I'm gonna smash this guy.
you know what was still crazy back then, Rick? You still, like me, I still had the idea or the concept that I grew up with about fighting. And that was the bigger dude always wins, or the, ninth degree black belt guy in Kung Fu, he wins all the time. He's a ninth degree black belt. Look at his belt. He's got like 9 rings around it, right?
Yep.
So I still had somewhere buried in my head that idea that that shit was true. And so, somewhere in my subconscious that rang like it's just this little voice, going, oh, dude, he's king of the bear pit. And then all of a sudden, it's like all that shit's just wiped clean because now I'm out there doing my thing, right? I'm out there, and it's not I'm out there surviving, I'm out there as a predator, right? I'm
Oh,
out
dude, you
there
were
to,
far from a guy who looked like he was hanging on trying to survive. You flipping steamrolled everybody.
yeah.
Um,
Oh man, it was interesting because looking back on it, going, yeah, I mean it's predatorial response. It's like a survival instinct on, you know, on a lot of stuff. Well, I was on a lot of stuff, but I mean, on a lot of stuff. You
and
know,
you ran up an awesome undefeated record for a big part of your long run in your
yeah,
career.
yeah,
And so, Mark, what at that point in time, the viewing audience wasn't that educated. We still didn't know really what submission wrestling was. We did. We saw
mm-mm.
was Gracie. When I say we, I'm talking about the general
Yeah,
audience.
yeah,
I knew more because I was in the business, but not that much more. And back then, I think there are guys we would look at. I think maybe Mark Coleman first, and then I think maybe Mark Kerr second. We're like, that guy's unbeatable. And we didn't
Yeah.
really understand the concept back then. And we didn't know that eventually John Jones would be beat and everybody would be beat eventually. Did you at a certain point ever believe that you were unbeatable?
Man, that's an interesting question. You know, we're so in the fighters world, like our conversations, and I think I'm remembering this correctly. All of that undefeated shit came from Hickson. And Hickson put out there that he was like 400-0,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And nobody back then even had any inkling of like, okay, well, are you counting the 2 fights you had in the sandbox when you're in elementary school?
Who was
Are you
keeping the
counting?
record?
Are you counting the 3 you had in junior high school, and then the 10 fights you had in high school? Are you counting all those? You know, and that's kind of like now I can look at it and have some kind of humor towards it. I have no doubt that Hickson in his day doing submission grappling along with his brother, they're bad motherfuckers. There is
Absolutely.
no getting around that. The
Absolutely.
argument just, there's no, I can't say one disparaging thing against them. Hoyce proved it on a level that Hickson never did. And that's the reality of it. And it's not to say, I mean, Hickson, you know, they're like, I've talked to Hoyce since the competition days, and he really is an amazing, amazing human being.
Yeah, very nice guy. Very
Unbelievable, just sincere, genuine. Um, you know, and he had said like he was never meant to fight. His father taught them to be teachers of the art so they can grow the sport. And you know, it just turns out that Hoyce is the one that stepped up to answer the bell when, you know, that whole family's kind of integrity was challenged of like, your art ain't what you think it is. And Hoyce's dad's like, no, it is.
yeah, and Horion, the
Yeah.
business minded brother. He told me once, and I think I've heard this in other places, that getting Hoist out there, and might sound like we may have somewhat different accounts, but I think it's interesting what I'd heard, which was, well, we're going to show that our art is the best in the world because we know it is.
Yeah.
We're going to do it against every style, every discipline. We're going to pick big, giant guys because the world did think back then the biggest guy was a guy that was going to win, and the toughest looking guy. And I heard that Hoist was a strategic selection because he was the guy in the entire family that least looked the part. Where if
I hadn't heard that part. That's
yeah,
actually really good.
it kind of makes sense if you think about it from a
Yeah.
promotion or marketing standpoint, because like I remember, look, I'm going to sound like some bullshit story of Woodstock because everybody was at Woodstock, right? I, honest to God, was at UFC 1 at Mammoth in Denver. And this is 1993. My buddy Jay Trey,
Wow.
and the building was half full. And I remember when Ken Shamrock came walking out for the first time. Nobody had ever heard of him yet. I mean, if you're in Japan and you're a hardcore fan,
Yeah, you have. Yeah.
otherwise, I didn't know who he was. But when he came walking out, I'm like, wow, that guy looks the part, right? Dude, when Hoyce came walking out, you're like, who's the skinny, balding dude in the gi, right? Now, Horion,
Yeah.
Hickson would have made a different impression because that guy
Hickson does look the part.
he looked like
He
the
does.
Brazilian version of Ken Shamrock. And
Yes, he does. That's interesting because you know what? In all of that, like in Rio then he looks like I'm on a surfboard every day out there. You know, it's just as different. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I didn't even put all that together till you just told me.
yeah, so you put Hoyce out there, and then he wins this whole thing. You're like, holy shit. This is the real deal, right? So, Mark, I never do this on the show, but now I have to ask just because it's a fun question. If you fought Hoyce in your prime and his prime, what would have happened?
Oh, you know, and I think I said this. I don't know if I said it directly to you. So we were inked on paper to fight in Pride 2.
Oh no, I didn't know this. No.
Yeah. So um so Pride, which was KRS back then,
Hmm.
um, they got a hold of me. They said, okay, we're going to pay a gazillion dollars, you know, to fight the best people in the world. The first person we want you to fight is Hoist Gracie. So I
Sure.
go over to Japan and we do this press conference, all this stuff. And we were inked to fight. Uh, God, it would have been March of 1998.
Well, how do I never know this before? Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what's even crazier? I was digging through an old hard drive that I had, and I think I found the contract.
Wow.
That would be interesting. If I can find it, I'll send it to you.
I'd love to see
Like
it.
absolutely. So so this topic has come up a couple of times. Uh God, man, you know what? As a competitor, I'd like to think that I would have won. That I was so imposing physically that I would have been able to impose my will on him. But watching him fight Sakuraba and watching just how tough of a competitor he is, it would have been interesting because all it would take is one mistake from me,
Uh,
and that's it. It's game over.
it
You
would.
know,
Yeah, it's so hard to look back and say what would have happened. And I never thought about this question until we started talking. I don't think he would have been able to withstand the assault. You're right. If you gave him something, he would have taken it, no doubt.
oh God, yeah, man. He's just so slick in being able to, like, if I've watched a ton of his stuff because there was always supposed to be this rematch. And back then it was like acquiring all of it like VHS tape, like getting a VHS tape. And God, man, it's just, it's one of the people that actually, as a competitor, I admired him just because of his grit. But more than his grit, he was just a technical genius, man. He could, he'd work, 4 minutes in a round to set up one thing at the very end of the round.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And when you would go back and watch the film, you would go like, "Oh shit, he's baiting him." And he
Yeah.
baits him again and he baits him again and then he pulls it and he baits it. It's just these little things that you go like when you're in the heat of the moment to be able to have that composure to do that, that's a different kind of competitor.
He's playing high level chess. That's for sure.
Oh God, man, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's just one of those things where that whole um he shattered the idea that you need to be 6'10" and 300 pounds, or you have to be, X, Y, or Z, or look apart. I mean, it's just really he did a lot, I think, for the community of mixed martial arts to usher them into the 21st century.
The Gracies deserve all the credit for putting it, if not being the ultimate guys that put it on the map, making the largest contribution ever for sure.
Yeah, absolutely,
Well,
absolutely.
we'll never see that fight. It's fun to think about. But regardless, so you get through your steamrolling opponents. You're at the top of the game. You're ranked number one in the world. You win Abu Dhabi's 3 years in a row, I think it was.
Yeah.
The guy with no submission background, by the way. Let's not forget that. So, Mark, what happens, man? We got to get into this. So, there's a very famous movie, and if people haven't heard of it, it's not famous to them, but I'm telling people it's famous. It's called The Smashing Machine, and it was a highly, highly regarded documentary that ran initially, I think, on HBO, and was
Yep.
so well received. It ran like a zillion times after that. You can still watch it, and it's a deep, dark, no holds barred look into the specimen's descent into hell. I think that's a fair way
Yeah.
to put it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember for my part in San Clemente when I lived, if you remember my wife, Gabrielle, We
Yep.
had an apartment at Seacrest Apartments. That was big, high wheeler dealer I was living in an apartment at the time. And I remember renting another apartment in that community, which from time to time
What?
you and Mark
And
Coleman,
Mark.
Tom
Yeah.
Howard would stay at together.
Yeah.
And if memory serves, and I could be wrong, and correct me if your recollection is different, to me that was kind of like the beginning of the content that would later become the Smashing Machine.
You know, a lot of it was, you know, I think at the time, you know, looking back on it, you know, I was starting to place, you know, just this enormous amount of pressure on myself. And I think a lot of it, you know, bringing up Hickson earlier was the idea, you know, like, you know, being undefeated, you know, not having a loss. Um, you know, that was kind of the standard back then. And it's so unrealistic. You know, it's like the downward pressure on women to be these stick figures, and you know, it's like the same kind of concept back then, because Hickson said I'm 400-0, you know, and he just threw that out there, and it's like, oh shit, well shit, I need to be undefeated, and it's like it just doesn't happen. You know, it's like, and as more money started to come into the sport, the likelihood of that happening was less and less, because more money attracts more talent.
Yep.
And when you get more talent in there, you're gonna have one day where you're just not up to the challenge.
And that talent pool grew fast and emerged.
Oh,
But Mark, you know, I got to think your first, I believe your first loss was to Fujita in Japan, and
yep.
Fujita was a tough son of a bitch, man. Maybe kind of, and I just thought of this for the first time. Maybe in some ways, like just like Hickson is a Brazilian version of Ken Shamrock, or vice versa. Maybe you and Fujita were almost like mirror versions of each other. He being like the Japanese.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
Way.
God. Yeah.
But
Looking back on it, he was almost like, you know, it's hard to call him a plant, you know, like put in there as being the disruptor, but he was put in there to be the disruptor, you
okay.
know. And you know, he, looking back on it, he actually had a really good wrestling career, you know,
Yep.
at a very high level.
Yep.
So he, you know, part of what my secret sauce back then was in starting mixed martial arts was that I had an Olympic level training mentality, and that's a world class training mentality because of my wrestling background. When you come from a pure mixed martial arts background, and it's not K1 and it's not a Muay Thai, right? You don't have the class of athletes that train at that world class level, and now you do all the way across the board. Back then, so if you go through, you know, college wrestling, and then go from that to senior freestyle Olympic style wrestling, it gives you a level because you're exposed to other competitors around the world that train at very high levels.
Yes.
So you understand what it is to compete at that high level. Back then, you had these pockets of athletes that understood it. This is a good example. Frank Shamrock, right? Frank Shamrock comes from that, but he was a mad scientist when it came to training.
Yeah, he was.
Oh my God, when it came to these little, like, he was doing heart rate training back then. He was doing heart rate recovery. He's doing time recovery. He's doing these circuits. And, you know, 25 years ago, there's nobody on the planet doing that.
No, nobody was doing that. Mark, the first guy I brought into MMA that I managed for a fight and cornered for was Randy Couture's first opponent ever. Big, giant pro wrestler who dubiously was also the heavyweight champion of Finland in boxing, which probably wasn't worth a whole lot. And this guy's a 6'5", 300-pound, jacked up, scarred, tattooed, flipping monster. Randy was terrified. He'll admit to that. And this guy trained like 30 minutes in total for the entire fight. And it was just, and Randy ate his lunch in no time at all. It's like,
oh my God.
You see that these days. It doesn't work that way anymore.
No. Oh my God. It doesn't work that way. So back then it was, first loss to Fujita, he understood what it was like to compete at that high level. So in that bout, there were so many other things going on at that time. There was, there's never an excuse for losing. I mean, I would step up and say I lost, man. It's hard as a person to go, he kicked my ass.
Well, my big question for that fight is, did he win that fight or did you lose that fight?
I lost that fight.
That's what I
I, I
thought. That's what I thought.
you know, I would say this, Rick, and I'm sorry to cut you off there, but
Mhm.
a lot of that is, as far as just if you go athlete to athlete, right? I'm a better athlete, right? I had more MMA experience. I had more ring experience. The one thing that sometimes is unaccountable is determination and grit,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Going, God, man, he's not very talented, but fuck, he's got grit,
Yep.
And sometimes that gets you through. And there's a whole litany of other factors, but that's a fight that I look back and I go, well, Mark and I should have had our day. That would have been fucking phenomenal,
You and Coleman.
but yeah. And it just didn't happen. It wasn't supposed to happen like that.
Yep. I remember the first fight that I cornered, first time I ever cornered for you, and first fight when I was your manager, was Hugo Duarte
Yeah.
and he's a respectable guy for sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you won that fight, but you didn't do what you did to the pit fighting Army Ranger guy. It's like it just, to me, it wasn't you out there anymore, if that makes sense. And
um,
I'm kind of like wondering if you would agree with that, and if so, like what was happening?
um, so this probably you never heard this part of it. So, to that point, I had like 3 or 4 fights in a row where I don't even think it went a minute, right? And, back then, it was these bulletin boards. They didn't have really bloggers, but you can get on these MMA bulletin boards, and
Yep.
I started reading this shit where it's like, "Oh, fuck Kerr, he's so juiced up, he can't go more than a minute. That's why he's, trying to knock everyone out in the first 30 seconds, blah, 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 blah."
Yeah, because everybody
So,
wants to fight longer than they need to, right? Of course.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
So I end up getting in this conversation after the fight. And if you remember, Boss was also in the corner and
Mhm.
he was pissed.
I
He was
remember very well.
frustrated.
He was going nuts in the corner. I remember well. Yeah.
And part of that was just he was like, just end it.
Yeah.
And I think, Rick, part of that sickness is listening to the clippings or the bulletin board material and going out there and going, I'm gonna beat you until you fucking quit.
Ah,
Instead of choking you out, instead of doing X, Y, and Z, I'm just gonna keep beating on you. And I don't care if it takes 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. I'll just, and I think part of that was like once I got past like the 10-minute part, and then it was like 15 minutes, because I think the bout went like 20, 18 minutes or something like that.
long. Yeah.
And it was so fucking long, and Boss was just like you could have jumped on his back and choked him out. You could have done this, and this, and it just he was frustrated, really frustrated.
I remember a few times Boss was frustrated back in those days.
Yeah, yeah.
Jiu-jitsu days. I mean, you were always the guy that I talked about during the intro. Intelligent, charming, and I forgot to mention, truly one of the most genuinely nice guys. but dude, you weren't the easiest guy. Not that I was either. But you weren't the easiest guy to connect with.
No, you know what, Rick, man, part of part of looking back, a lot of it, I think a lot of times it's being difficult just to be difficult, and I didn't have the experience in that realm of either managing or all the other aspects that come with it. So, I didn't really know what like norms or standards were, right? And I was trying to create something, I tell people, I go, well, my first time ever showing up to Japan for a press conference, everybody's in sweats and I'm in a fucking Hugo Boss suit,
Yep.
because
Nice.
I wanted to bring something a little different to the table.
Smart move, man. Yep.
Right, right. And not really understanding like there's a whole philosophy behind that, right?
All right, Mark, we've looks like Mark is still with us, but we've lost his image and his voice for a moment. Hopefully he will be back with us in a moment. We're in the midst of conversation here on Talking Tough with Mark Kerr, and I know he'll be back. This has been great so far. I'm looking down, so I'm texting him, folks, to make sure we're getting him back. And we'll get a little deeper into all the craziness before we wrap up here. Now I'm done talking. We'll have a hard edit at this point. Looks like you're back.
I'm
All
sorry
right.
about that, Rick. That's
No,
like,
no, that's all right. That's all right. That's why we have editing software, guys. And as promised or as hoped, we're back. All right,
yeah, right.
here we are. Hey, Mark, good to see you again. Okay,
Yeah, good to be here.
so man, I want to just like with I want to tell you a quick story, and it's going to be one of millions in your life. If you're anything at all like me, you've forgotten a lot of them. So one night we went to a party. We were at a nightclub on PCH in Laguna Beach.
Oh
It was
my God.
you and I and Mark Coleman and Tom Howard. And then we heard there was
Mhm.
an after hours party in the Laguna Beach Hills in some mansion.
Oof.
Do you remember that?
Oh my God, it was, I think the guy that owned the bars again, named like Rizza or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yep. Rizzo. Yep. That's right. So we go to this mansion, and I remember like the ecstasy X tabs came out. I'd never done that.
Yeah. Oh,
Never done one. You guys are in the midst of training for fights. Tom is being Tom, of course, Tom Howard,
yeah.
one of my dearest friends, and like Boss Rutan at that time, and Roddy Piper, God rest Roddy's soul. They were all the kings of excess. None of them are anymore, which is great. And the X tabs come out, and I do one, and it's like an hour later. I'm like, I don't feel anything, and I forget who it was. I think it was probably Tom being Tom. It was Tom. It was like, probably him. He's like, just do another one then. Okay. And I remember like being carried out of the party eventually by the two top teammates in the planet, which was great because I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't walk. It was like a typical night back then, man. And it's like,
It really was.
it's like, but what happens in your mind when you're the top heavyweight in the world and then you start to live your life that way? Is there a reason for it? Do you think back on that at all now and go, why did I do that? What was I thinking? I needed to do that to be where I am now. I mean, how did that all go?
Oh man. You know, I've obviously examined a lot of parts of my life, and those kinds of instances, um, you know, I really felt this sense of just absolutely two things, entitlement, and then just a sense of immortality where, you know, I just felt like this is who I'm going to be forever. I'm going to do whatever I want to do because I am, you know, I am immortal. You know, and it's nothing that you form the ideas in your head, and your behavior translates that. You know, it's like you don't verbally go, "Hey, man, I'm immortal and, you know, I'm entitled to this." But in your head, it's this like conversion of like that's going on in your head, and you translate it into really fucked up behavior.
It becomes deeply rooted, I'm sure.
Oh my God, man, it's still entitlement still fucks with me to this day because
I don't get that from you anymore, but go ahead, please.
it still does, and it comes up. I'm more cognitively aware of it right now, in how I operate, and sometimes it's an attitude, sometimes it's you know, in, you know, this self-centeredness, you know, which is just, you know, again, that's part of my disease, right? You know, part of my, you know, addiction, you know, but it's a lot easier to recognize. You know, when back then, when I'm totally entrenched in it, no way. I mean, I am riding this thing until it crashes. And usually it crashes pretty spectacularly.
Yeah, well, you know, and in your case, it was all chronicled on film and
Yeah.
for the world to see. Not many people can see
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
so when the Smashing Machine, and I'll just repeat it again for anybody who missed it. I think one way, there's a lot of ways to summarize it. It's a great piece of filmmaking. It's a great documentary. One way to summarize is the number one fighter in the world, Mark Kerr's descent into hell. I think that's a fair way to look at it.
And well,
Did you know that's what it was when it was being made?
well, this gives you another layer to what I just said. When you're in entitlement and the sense of immortality, what it creates is this self delusion, right? And so delusionally, I thought my world was completely different. So when I got approached by John Greenhalgh he's like, "Hey, can you get us passes to this event? We're going to come out. We're going to film a little bit. I want to do, da, da, da." You know, I was,
John Greenhouse. I'm sorry, that's the producer.
yes, John Greenhalgh. Yeah. He's the producer. And John and I went to Syracuse University together. We went to film school there.
So you got history.
And so he's a little bit younger than me. I was a little bit older than him. But nonetheless, I mean, you know, college wrestling team is just a small group of guys, right? So, I mean, we all knew each other. And so when John approached me, I had already a level of trust with him.
Sure.
You know, but that delusion was running so deep that I thought my life was completely different. I was like, "Sure, come on in, man. This should be great."
Wow.
And, you know,
you thought it'd be something that would make you look even cooler than you already were looking.
oh, absolutely.
Oh, wow. Right. So
Absolutely.
it really, I mean, it was cool in some weird ways, but I'm not sure that's how most, I'm sure that's not how your mother would have looked at it.
Oh, no, not even close.
so this comes out and you see the edit. And what are your thoughts when you first see it? And of equal importance, what does your family say to you?
Oh my God, man. You know what? The
It's a
one
fucking
thing.
brutal show, man. It really
Oh
is.
my God, man. You know, Rick, the part about it, which I didn't completely understand, and most people don't. When you're either in a drug or alcohol addiction or sex or gambling or whatever it is, right? Another delusion that I had was that I'm doing it to myself. How the fuck does it affect you? Right. And that's again this entitlement, this delusion of self that if I'm putting something in my body, why does it hurt you?
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's so what I didn't understand until my family saw this is how many nights they were up because my girlfriend at the time, Dawn in the film, had called them to say he's on another bender. He's on a run. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I have no control over him. She called my brother Michael, who I respect tremendously and has been there through thick and thin my whole
Everyone.
entire career.
Yeah. Sure.
And so, I didn't understand that. I would get a call from him going, "Hey, what's going on?" Just as a check-in because he didn't know how to handle it either, and he didn't want to scare me further down the road by going, "You motherfucker, man, you better stop or I'm coming out there and fucking da, 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 da." So he didn't know how to handle it, and obviously that in and of itself reinforced the delusion of what the fuck, you know. So there was a lot of deep stuff going on back then, and part of that when all this stuff started coming out and really, really trying to get down to like what is going on. Um, it's a tough ask, especially at, where I was in my career, what was going on, um, and the amount of tension. I look at it like this too. When the film came out, back then HBO, they were gods. Like if it came out on HBO, man, it was like the gold standard.
A very big deal. Yes.
Oh my God, man. It's not like you're in the corner porno shop, fucking in the seedy side of town. This is on 44th Avenues of the America, HBO building, top floors, two huge freaking cinemas up there. I mean, it is as big time gets. So when this comes out, there's no social media, there's no Instagram, there's no Facebook, there's none of this is it. So this is the first transition that people could actually, from this little pocket MMA world to mainstream media, HBO, they look at it in, for a lot of people, they look at it and go, "Oh my God, I can't watch." But for some people that watched that first 10, 15 minutes, they couldn't take their eyes off of it.
Sure. Well, it's like you can't look away from a train wreck sometimes.
Yeah, it's
Quite a bit. I'm sorry. It's fascinating. It absolutely is fascinating.
no, it was a full on train wreck, Rick, man. It had bodies flying out everywhere. I mean, and it
You said something I never thought of before, which was that was probably the first major mainstream media exposure for mixed martial arts. I never thought about that before. Did you take any heat from like Pride, from UFC?
UFC I did. Oh my God, man. So if you want to look at overlap, Bob Meyerowitz was having a complete fire sale when he knew it literally he had pissed every boxing commission off in the United States.
Yep.
It had narrowed it down to where he was legally allowed to do it in a couple places, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And so John Greenhalgh and John Himes they approached the UFC, and the UFC is like, all right, you want to buy footage? Sure. How much footage you want to buy? And so they sold them all this footage at fire sale prices. And that's how we were able to get the footage from the UFC. Pride,
Right.
so this is what's crazy about Pride, and John Greenhalgh reminded me of this, that when they went over and filmed the Volchanchen fight where he illegally kneed me in the head,
Yep.
and it was a DQ,
Mhm.
it was a no contest. They never got Pride to sign releases. So
Oops.
all of that footage they captured, they couldn't use. So as this started progressing down the road, and they realized, oh my God, man, we don't have a film if we don't have that footage, obviously. They ended up coming to me, and I said, you know what's interesting? I have a contract renewal coming up, and I'm going to tell Pride I won't sign it unless they sign the
Sure.
releases.
Sure.
And I had totally forgot about it. And literally I presented it to them. They hemmed and hawed and were like, because they didn't know what kind of film was going to be made. Right. And I'm going to circle this back to the UFC.
Mm-hmm.
So Pride signs off on it, and the film gets made. HBO buys it. At the same time, the Fertitta brothers bought the UFC from Bob Meyerowitz.
Oh boy. All right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dana White gets an idea. He hears about this film, and he calls, or has the Fertitta brothers, whoever, call HBO and say, hey, we realize that this film's being made. It has footage, all the documents, everything was signed. We legally had the footage. They couldn't protest. They couldn't take it to court. They couldn't put a cease and desist. They couldn't do any of that. Plus, you wouldn't want to do that to HBO. It just would be the wrong way to start a company.
Yep.
So they said, hey, can we get a copy of it to see how this is going to air?
Oh boy. Right.
And you know what HBO said? It comes out on January 22nd. You can watch it just like everybody else when it comes out.
Nice. Yeah, that's true.
And to say that to Dana White, or to say that to the Fertitta brothers, who probably at the time weren't really used to hearing a bunch of no's, I would probably venture to guess. So that set a very, very fucked up tone. And then with the UFC, they asked me to fight Pete Williams. And I said, no, I'm under contract with the Japanese. And that's the last time they entertained, offered, looked at, talked to me, anything. That was
Do you have
it.
a relationship with Dana at all these days?
No, no.
I mean,
It's
no reason to, unless he puts you in the Hall of Fame, of course, which will happen at one point.
yeah. It's just, you know what? It's one of those conversations that you have where the UFC Hall of Fame is really the MMA Hall of Fame, right? Because it's the whole entity, right? It's like trying to understand, like, can the story of MMA be told without this person? That's usually the criteria.
And it'll follow the WWE Hall of Fame by the same token, because for up until 10 years ago, if you weren't a WWF superstar, you weren't going to get into that Hall of Fame. And
Yeah,
now they're realizing they have to put people into it that never even worked for the company, because it has become the de facto Hall of Fame for the entire industry.
yeah,
UFC is absolutely going that direction if they're
yeah.
not there already. So you'll have to be in.
Well, it's just one where, like, for me being where I was in mixed martial arts and in the UFC and Pride, and to go over and do Abu Dhabi was such a big risk at the time, because it could either invalidate me, or, oh, he's a big steroided up dude, man. That's why he's winning these things, right? You know, or it could absolutely validate me. And that was a continuation of like the evolution of understanding that mixed martial arts is really complex, man. It involves so much detail from so many different disciplines. And that's kind of what I was trying to demonstrate at the time, going, I have a wrestling background. The first thing I knew is that I didn't know how to freaking fight. I didn't know how to fight. I know how to compete, at a very high level. I didn't know how to fight.
You know how to control
So,
the body.
yep. And so that was part of the um, Beverly Hills Jiu Jitsu and Boss Rutan
Mhm.
and Oleg and Marco Huaz and Pedro Hizo and that whole group of guys.
Yeah,
And
what
then
a
now,
crew. Wow, what a
oh
crew.
my God, can you imagine?
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? Like Marco at the time didn't speak any English, and
Yeah.
I was just joking with Boss about this. I go, um, so we would go there, and Marco would want to wrestle, and I wrestle with him all day long,
He had a
and
big
then
smile. He had a big kid-like smile all the time
he
also.
did, man. Such a good person, man. Such a genuinely good person. Um, and so I would say to him in English when we would spar, I would go, Marco, no headshots. Because we didn't wear headgear or mouthpieces. We were fucking knuckleheads, right?
How about don't kick me in the leg also?
That was the other one, but he would go no he would go shin he would we would I would go I wouldn't spar him without shin pads. Because a couple times I go, okay, all right. He could his timing where he would just kick me off my feet,
Yep.
right?
Oh
He would
yeah.
just kick me off my feet, like because a lot of like with Boss and with Marco, if you were lazy with anything, they would like if you threw a lazy jab against Boss would just he'd hit you 10 times.
Yep.
Like everything that you did with him had to be, deliberate, willful, intentional,
Yep.
right? You can't just go like, hey, I'm gonna just, because it just would hurt. Um, so with Marco, I'd go, Marco, no headshots. And he'd go, okay, okay, okay. I'd swear, man, like 1 minute into the round, pap, pap. And
Well,
then he would try to explain to me, he'd try to explain to me in Portuguese that, hey, it's a reaction. I'm
yeah.
not doing it on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't understand this till much later. And I go, I, why didn't you just fucking translate that to like, dude, we need to do something different because I'm tired of getting punched in the fucking head.
That's all. Those were the days, man. Well, Mark, let's man, I've kept you for a while, but a couple more things I wanted to get into before we let you go here.
Yeah.
Staying in the abyss for one more moment only till we really come out of it. So at the end of Smashing Machine sees you in a pretty dark place. What people out there, they want to know this because fans of mixed martial arts, pro wrestling even, that are watching this, they know Mark the Specimen Kerr as the one-time top heavyweight in the world, a legend, an icon. They've heard some recent amazing news. Maybe they've forgotten that you've experienced just as bad as they have, maybe even worse. And people find that relatable, man. In my experience, the I don't want to say average, nobody's average, but the citizen, the regular man, it helps them to know their heroes have been through it too. I think people take solace in that and inspiration and coming back out the other side. Is there like there's probably several rock bottoms, I'm sure, but
Oh man.
how would you characterize and describe like the worst of the worst? Where were you and what did that look like?
Oh man. Uh, the like when I have a bad day, like now, right? The thing that pulls me back into, like it's not that bad. And this is hard to admit, and I've only talked about it a couple of times, but back in I think 2006, 2007, um, I just got divorce is finished. My son at the time was probably like 2 or 3, and just I couldn't stay sober. Just couldn't get it together, and I end up literally um, living out of the back of my fucking car. Like literally living out of the back of my car. And that is like my best thinking at the time. That's where it landed me. You know, and there had for me the level of humility to get to where I am now, the amount of work that I've had to do. Um, it really is. It's humbling because it requires a level of honesty um, about what my defects are, what my attributes are, you know, um, what I can contribute, um, the lessons I could, you know, help somebody with. It's a lot, Rick, man. But I just remember, literally, you know, in the back of my car and just not having a freaking clue what I was gonna do.
So it was the opposite of, hey, I'm in my car. This is so cool. I don't have to mortgage.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It wasn't hey, oh my God, I'm free. Hey, it wasn't a minimalist lifestyle. No,
But
by
you
any stretch.
probably didn't have a lot of close contact with your son, I would imagine, at that point.
No, no. And then really what kind of pulled all this back together was, I ended up going up to Colorado for a little bit, training up there to try to get ready for an event. And I wasn't in a space to be able to train, and I came back down, and I'll never forget this. I mean, my son, like I said, was 2 or 3 at the time. And um, I, my ex-wife opens the front door, and my son cowers behind her
Oh,
because
God.
he doesn't recognize me.
Oh, right.
It had been like 7 months, 8 months since I'd seen him, and he doesn't recognize me. And it was this feeling. The feeling, I can pull it up right now, and it gets me emotional. Because it's one of those feelings where at that moment I'm never gonna put him in that spot again, and I'm never gonna have this feeling again. Like I've just absolutely just fucking let this kid down. you know and there's been a lot of moments in between here and there, and my son is 19 now. And he's turned out to be just an amazing kid.
Yeah, I'm sure life looks a whole lot different. I know life is different for you these days. I know that by talking to you last week and today. And I want to, toward the end of this, really get into what your life looks like today, because I know it's like the proverbial happy ending that people, gives people hope. But there's a
Yeah.
question I want to ask you before we get there. And it's this. So many, many years ago, your old colleague and friend, John Greenhouse, calls you, a guy maybe that can get a movie made, and says, hey, I want to try to make a movie with you. And it happens, and it comes out, and it is what it is. And you know what that movie is now. I think I'm actually going to go watch that again tonight, Mark. I haven't seen that.
Oh man.
I want to watch. I haven't seen it in 20 years, probably. I really feel like I want to watch it again. So you get it made, and you have the reaction. You have your parents have the reaction. They have
Yeah.
you got a movie made, and years later, many years later, some other guy calls you that maybe has the ability to get a movie made also, and
Yeah.
says, I want to make a movie with you about you. Can you tell us what that's about and what's happening with that now?
Yeah. So, God, man. So I get a call um, from a guy named Brad Slater, and Brad Slater works for William Morris Agency.
Yeah, the
Brad
number one movie
Slater.
in the world.
Oh, he's huge. I mean, so I get a call from him, and he says, "Hey, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, um, wants to do a biopic movie about your life based on the documentary."
Well, hold on. Did you think you were being pranked when you first got
Oh,
the?
100%, man. 100%, Rick. This is like one of these where it's like, I swear, man, it's like, where's the camera? Like, I know there's got to be a camera in there somewhere, just like not. And I even looked him up, and I punched the number in the computer. I'm like, oh shit, the number does go to William Morrison Agency. Well, fuck.
And for context, for those out there who don't know, because I've been in that industry forever, William Moore, WME, which
Oh,
now owns UFC and WWE,
and yeah,
is the number one agency in the world. And Brad Slater is at the top of the heap, what they call a packaging agent, which are the guys that put entire projects together under the William Morris banner. So yeah, it doesn't get higher on the food chain than WME or Brad there. So I just
no,
want
no. I mean, it's like calling the president, right?
yeah,
It's like, it was like one of those feelings where, when it started, it was like, okay, and then from there, the progression of it, um, everything needed to happen the way it happened. So when this started back like 4 years ago, you know, I didn't even get excited about it, Rick. I just kind of tried to stay between here and here, right? I just said kind of like my life needs to go on regardless,
good,
if this happens or doesn't happen. And I still have that kind of sense of feeling,
good.
but the difference is now everything's in place.
Now, yeah, now
Meaning,
it's green lit. It's happening.
oh my God, man, it's so everything's in place. Back then, he had an idea. So D had an idea and he didn't have all the pieces worked out. And so now everything just kind of fell into place. It's like, A24 Studios, Benny Safdie's directing it. Benny Safdie's writing it with DJ. And, $7 is going to produce it. A24 is a studio that's, gonna, I mean, it's turned into where it's like, oh shit, this is gonna happen.
Well, Mark, and for those out there listening that don't know, who's playing Mark Kerr in the movie?
Uh Dwayne Johnson, The Rock.
That's insane, man.
Yeah.
So,
You ever sit around? This is what's funny. So this is a running joke for a while, Rick. Hey, oh, they're gonna make a movie about your life. Who's playing you? Like the game of like, well, if they're gonna make a movie about your life, Rick, who would play you?
well,
Or
Brad Pitt,
of
obviously,
course,
or
and
Channing
and
Tatum. I don't know one of the two.
and exactly like if I was like had all the options on the board, I'd go, oh, I'd probably want The Rock to play me, I guess. Just I'm just saying, looks, build wise, it's just like
Coolness. Sadly, Mark, I
yeah.
ended up with Paul Giamatti, but
It's
no,
better than Danny DeVito or something, right?
yeah, exactly.
But anyways, it's just one of those, run one of those, amazing things, and a lot of stuff that's gone on in my life. A friend had said it to me, and he said it matter of factly. He said, you know what? This is what you need to do. You need to go in your bathroom, look yourself in the mirror, tell yourself you love yourself, tell yourself you're worth it, tell yourself you deserve it, and tell yourself that you are just this. That's the character of who you are underneath all the fucking bullshit, underneath all the bad behavior, underneath all of that stuff. The reason why this moves forward is because of who you are as a person. And as this amazing context, when he put it in that context, I'm like, wow, like, you know, it makes sense. It makes sense that this is kind of how things have progressed and where I am now. And when I talk to DJ, he's just such a gracious guy, and he's just genuinely such a good person. He's like, "Hey, Mark, I want you to know this is an honor for me. I don't think this is like a really big honor for me. It allows him to move in a direction that he's never moved in before." And I told him, I said, DJ, I think, at this point, I would venture to say that you were made and born for this role. Because he identifies with it in a way that he thinks he can bring it to life,
I can see that,
and
certainly. Yeah.
in a way that when you talk to him about it, you can feel the excitement.
Well, he's a real guy, for a guy
Oh,
who became the top guy in the history of a make believe world. Well, he became that because he's real. So
yep,
I could absolutely see that and see. I don't know him well. I actually, when he came back after many years off to wrestle Hulk Hogan in the main event at WrestleMania, I got a call from the head of WWE Talent Relations going, "Hey, The Rock's coming back. He's got ring rust. Can you bring him into your gym and kind of like work some of the rust off him?" And I went, "Sure, of course."
yep,
So he comes. It was supposed to be like a week-long deal. I brought all my top instructors in. Tom Howard was there that day, other guys that you know. He came in. Dude, he looked like $1,000,000 in the first 10 seconds. And all I could, we had one session, and all I could say is like, "Hey, kid, I think you got the best." But no,
yeah,
you got how real and how genuine he was. And dude, it's awesome that you have that relationship with him now, and that you're in this place where the number one movie star in the freaking world is
yeah,
genuinely excited and humbled by playing you. That's but what I really like about this, Mark, the whole like fan worship part of it aside, is I can see like how humbled you are by it. And and I love what you said a couple minutes ago when you're talking about you look yourself in the mirror and say, "I love you," and you
yeah.
deserve it. And dude, that's great advice. I mean, there's going to be
For
very, very
anybody.
few of us that are going to ever have Dwayne Johnson play them in a movie. But what
Yeah,
you said applies to everybody in every situation every day.
yeah,
And that, aside from the part that I'm worshiping the fact that Dwayne Johnson is playing you in a movie, that's my favorite part of what we talked about tonight. And dude, it's just so cool that you're in that spot. It's
yeah. Rick, man, and I say this with a lot of humility because it took a lot of tries, right? And understanding that it took exactly how many tries it needed to be in order for me to get here, right? Not one more, one less, exactly the number that I was supposed to. And it's created, um, nobody can stay in a sense of gratitude 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But it's easy for me to just stop for a minute, even before this, to have just a sense of gratitude that I don't have to live in my own chaos, that I can actually, bring peace and joy around the people that are around me and understand that my life now is about connection. It's about connecting. It's about, putting myself out there in honest and genuine way till I can connect. That human connection is really what I've been after my whole entire life.
and you have
Not
that
under
now. You have that other little Dwayne Johnson movie thing aside. Your life now that characterizes your life. You have that with your son,
Yep,
with your brother, I would imagine,
yep, oh yeah, yeah.
and
And it does, it's that thing that, for me personally, that, like having this, uh, when I was younger, I had this fear. I was afraid to connect on certain levels, so I'd only give you the appearance or what I thought you wanted, or all these other things. And now I have the sense of comfort in myself that my like Jay Glazer's a good friend of mine, and Jay would he says it all the time. He goes, "Dude, your vulnerability is your strength. Period." Like if you're gonna go, you're a superhero, right? You're a superhero. What's your power? Vulnerability. It's like counterintuitive, but it's really what allows that connection to happen and allows me to be at peace with myself.
Mark, that's amazing. And I'm listening to everything you're saying, and it's just resonating so strong. I don't know if you can see this obnoxious background I have up on the podcast here, but there's this bottom. Do you see the bottom
Yeah.
in the red? The world's toughest men and women at their most vulnerable, and
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
that that's what makes
Yeah.
people real, man. And it's like I've kept you so long, and I don't want to keep you. I mean, I'd love to keep the conversation going, but in
I
respect
got it.
to your time, it's like normally I would do, say, "Hey, Mark, thank you." Then you'd go away, and I would do a big wrap up. But I don't think there's anything to say beyond this, man. And if I did, it's going to weaken what I think is great.
So here's for your listeners. This is what I'll give. I'll give you this promise, and I'll give them this promise.
Yeah, why
So
don't you take us home, please?
okay,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna take you home. Okay, so as this movie progresses, we're gonna have an update. And so this is what I'd really, really, really like to do. I'd like to, when I'm on set, come back on the show. Because I'm gonna be an executive producer. I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm going to be there, and I would love to be able to do like a pod. I'd like to be able to get back on the show and kind of walk, your listeners through another chapter of this.
Yeah, that would be great.
Oh my God, man, it would be fantastic, man. It would be like really cool, and I think part of it, Rick, and I'm just going to end here. Part of it is just again, the connection that you and I have. And really, like, I could do a podcast and interview you because there's so many different levels to, really admiring what you've done through the years, and the consistency you've been as a person. So I really do admire that and respect that. And I'd love to be able to take your listeners on set with me, man.
Oh, that's good. Thank you so much, Mark, man. I love you, man. It was so great.
I love you too, buddy.